They have 10 minutes break in a program and they call it a networking break. Like, seriously, come on. You cannot
You can barely get a coffee in 10 minutes.
Right? So the fact that you call it networking break will not make it a networking break. So we need to think seriously about those breaks. And there are so many studies about how adding breaks increases engagement and reduces cognitive overload. And eventually it affects people's satisfaction with their learning experience. But also what it does, it helps people remember more from what they've learned.
Welcome to Events Demystified podcast, where we explore and demystify the world of in-person, virtual, hybrid event AV production and technology by sharing insightful tips, tricks and tactics to make your events a success. This podcast is brought to you by Tree Fan Events, a woman-owned boutique event production agency. And your host is Anka Trifan, a technical event planner and producer with almost 2 decades of hands-on technical experience in event production.
Welcome, friends, to another episode of Events Demystified podcast, your one-stop shop for tangible, technical, and practical planning advice for anyone in the events industry. Today's episode is sponsored by Trifan Events, and I am your host, Anka Plato Trifan. Super excited to introduce today's guest, an event psychology advisor, someone who's known for providing science-based solutions to event challenges, someone whom I've sort of kind of been following on LinkedIn for a little while, and I highly enjoyed her post so much that I decided that it's time to have her join me on the air and demystify the human behavior that helps event professionals plan better events. So on the show with me today, I have Victoria Matei, an event psychology advisor and co-founder of Matei Events, a business event consultancy. Victoria believes that experiences take place in people's minds first and foremost, and by offering insight into the human behavior, she helps event professionals deliver more remarkable events with less effort. She provides ideas, strategies, and science-based solutions for increased engagement, retention, and revenue. Victoria is the author of Event Psychology Lab and 10 Principles of Strategic Event Planning book. She leads the Event Psychology Club, a community and the top resource for event professionals looking to transform events with brain science insights, and hosts the podcast What If I Told You, where she interviews behavioral scientists and practitioners about human psychology and mind. In addition to receiving Ford Foundation IFP Fellowship and IFP Alumni Awards, Victoria has been recognized by SPAR Meetings as a top 100 smart woman in meetings, a change maker by Meetingsnet, and in 2022, she was named the Meeting Professional of the Year. You can learn more about Victoria and all the things that she does, all the courses she offers by following the links in the episode notes. And in the meantime, let's welcome our guest in. Welcome to the show, Victoria. How are you doing, and what is something that has sparked some joy in you today?
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here to join you today. Well, today is a good day. It's snowing a little bit, so winter is here, and it's all good. I know I don't have any specific event in my life going on today, but I'm joining you on a podcast, and it's great. I'm always happy to talk event psychology. So,
well, let's make that the sparking of joy moment then, because the snow, I'm kind of sort of tired of it, to be honest. It's like it's time to just let's start with spring and let go of winter now that it's a few months into the year. So, Victoria, I love that we finally got to connect and be on the air, have this conversation, because I'll be honest, I love reading your posts on LinkedIn. They're very fascinating, maybe because behavior science, psychology, and neuroscience have always kind of sort of fascinated me. I remember being a little girl and I was really into books. I was sort of trying to escape my reality of growing up into a chaotic household by reading books. And my dad had this neuroscience books that literally they're 6 inches thick. And I remember being fascinated. I didn't understand the word. Like, I mean, I was, I don't know, probably second grade, third grade, fourth grade. And I was just going through those books and I was just fascinated by all those pictures was like the brain. And they're going obviously diving deep into the medical part of the neuroscience. And I had no idea what they're talking about, but it was just so fascinating. So many, many years later, as I'm reading your books, it's almost like it brings me back to that one small room in my house where I was like going through this book of like, this is so amazing. I wish I understand more of what this is about. So awesome that I get to talk to you about something that, you know, I've been really wanting to learn more, knowing that here you are having all this background into neuroscience and how that affects our attendees and how it can make our events better. I'm like so ready for this conversation. I mean, you can't stop me. So let's keep on the conversation before we even get into all of that by giving us maybe a bit of a background into your journey. How did you get here? What got you to be interested in this topic? And what drives you into making strides and basically doing all the research? Because there's a lot of research that goes into a lot of the psychology of events, right? And trying to figure out how we can improve events better from that point of view.
I was going to say, you know, thankfully we've got so many books right now that explain very complex things and concepts from psychology and behavioral science and neuroscience so that people can apply it in practice in their own fields. And I'm so grateful that, you know, we are living in these times when we can improve events using science. So like you said, you know, I'm an event psychology advisor, meaning that I help event professionals and event marketers improve events by using tools and ideas that come from science, from behavioral science, neuroscience, psychology. And I've always been interested in psychology. I studied it at my first university, and I even did a dual thesis in cognitive linguistics. But at that time, it was more like a personal passion for me. So I didn't really apply it in my life or in my job. And then many years later, when I already started my consultancy, and I started it, I think, 7 or 8 years ago, I gradually realized that there is not much science or psychology used in events. And once I realized that, I started, you know, researching and analyzing studies and, you know, experiments and talking with people from those fields. And I kind of taught myself about this area. So I started focusing on that more and more. And so far, you know, that's my 100% focus. And I use it to consult and I use it to teach. And a number of my initiatives are just about raising awareness among the event professionals to apply this approach in their job. Because what I love about those tools and those ideas, they are mostly cost efficient. So you don't need to have a lot of money or other resources. You need to have this knowledge and you need to know how to apply it correctly and intentionally. So that's what I do. And there are a lot of interesting insights that science provides us with. So I'm hoping that we can talk about it like in more detail, but that's basically what I do.
So how did you marry this passion for neuroscience and psychology to events? At one point, right, this information could be applied in so many other areas, but why events? What brought you there?
Right. Well, I fell into events accidentally, as many of us. Like I said, you know, my first education was my first degrees in linguistics. And then I started working for the international office at the university. And the international office people were responsible for conducting and running a lot of events, international events in particular. And so I started doing that as well. And I fell in love, you know, I just thought that it's something that I would love to do. And then many years later, I went to study international events management. I got the master's degree from the University of Surrey just because I thought that, you know, I would love to have this theoretical background. And yeah, so I mean, that's how I started like doing events. And then, like I said, you know, at some point I realized this connection between events and psychology, because events are all about people. So if we do that, if we create experiences for people, we need to know how people work. So that's how it happened. And ever since then, you know, I just try to, because I've been planner myself, I know that event professionals don't have a lot of time to go too much, like too in depth into that area. They just don't have this resource, right? And this is where I step in and I help them connect the dots. And what I always say, it's like I translate from science language into events language, because I've been planner myself. I know how it's done, but I also now focusing on this scientific approach, and I can help them apply that to improve experiences and event design in general.
I love that. Well, for sure, as you mentioned it, I think in one of your posts was that better event experiences come from understanding human psychology. And I totally agree with that statement. So let's dive deeper into this idea and better grasp what are some ways in which we can employ behavioral science, psychology, and neuroscience to plan and deliver better event experiences. In other words, what makes an experience the experience?
Well, exactly, because I think we have our default approaches are either, status quo, do what I always did, or follow what others do because it's safer, right? It works, so I just keep doing the same. Or another extreme is that, I need some big and bold innovation, right? And so it looks like as if we are aiming to look outwards, but we need instead to look inwards. We need to go deeper and, like I said, understand human behavior, because this way you can have ways that are cost efficient and highly effective. So the example is, I recently went to the Friends experience. It's like an exhibition which features, different props and photo points and photo opportunities, right? And I'm a massive fan of Friends, so I definitely could not miss that. So we went there, and I've got many takeaways from that visit, actually. But the one that I wanted to mention is about lines. So it's a big event. I'm not the only fan of Friends. Of course, there are so many people coming to this exhibition, right? So lines everywhere. And of course, at any big event, lines are inevitable. You cannot escape that. It's a part of the event, right? But you cannot escape it, but you can make it better for the attendees, because there were lines at the entrance, lines at the ticket check, lines at every photo opportunity, where they put the sofa on the stage.
It sounds like Disneyland.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. I'm going to talk about it in a minute. So yeah, those photo points, I love those, when you go and kind of imagine that you push this so far up the stairs and you can shout, pivot, pivot. Definitely could not miss that as well. And I wasn't alone. So lines there, lines at the exit, so everywhere. But we, like everyone, hates waiting, right? I mean, no one ever says, I love waiting for stuff.
In a line, exactly.
Of course, right? So, and we need to take that into account when we create the attendee journey, when we imagine how it's going to be. We need to take the psychology of waiting into consideration, because yes, lines are inevitable, but lines can be experience in itself. And this is what Disney does. They are masters of that, because they know that all this waiting kills the fun. But it's not, the research says that it's not about the number of minutes that we have, to wait. It's about the underlying emotions. And when we take care of those underlying emotions, meaning, uncertainty or boredom, when we take care of those emotions, then we can come up with solutions based again on that, understanding human behavior, right? That will improve that experience, that will make even waiting better, right? So what Disney does, they have, when you queue for those rides, they have game stops and different interactive stations along the line up to the main load area. So people basically, when they're queuing, they have this experience all the way on their journey to the main experience. So we can do that at events as well, right? Not only just, having posters on the wall, what they did at this Friends exhibition, because yeah, it's okay, but I need something to interact with. And that's when I feel waiting differently. Right. So that was a great takeaway for me that I wanted to share, because it's about psychology. You can either not make people wait, or you can make waiting the experience in itself.
That's amazing. I mean, there's certainly quite a few takeaways there, for our registration lines, that especially during some of the rush hours where everybody's like coming in to check in, and those lines can be quite a few, I wouldn't say miles long, but it feels like it. And it's like ways to make that more interactive and less frustrating, because boredom also can bring a level of frustration. Like I want to get where I want to get. Yes, I might have been late to the party because I had to stop to get a coffee. And now everything is like this, domino effect of like one thing after another. So I want to touch on something that you said a little earlier about how event planners, I mean, they're not really that great with taking risks, right? So who wakes up in the morning thinking, okay, today I'm just going to wake up and I'm going to take a bunch of risks and I'm going to wait in a lot of lines and I'm going to be so happy about everything, right? That's just not necessarily the case. So with that, when we're talking about planning an event and experimenting with new ideas, and many times, as an event planner, you're responsible for the outcome of that event. And if you take a risk that is not going to give the right outcome, you're going to be under a lot of pressure, right? Not just from your whatever, who you work with, but stakeholders, sponsors, attendees even, right? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the challenge of how can we be planning events, taking risks, but doing things in a way that we can expect different results as long as we take maybe smaller steps towards this larger risk that would really in long term mean that would make a difference for the event itself.
Yeah, first of all, I think that we need to forgive ourselves for not taking risks, because it's a human trait. We all humans, we all hate certain things, and we are cautious when it comes to risks, for example. So it's okay. But at the same time, of course, when we strive for improving our events, we need to understand that if we keep doing what we always done, we won't get better results. So we have to take risk and we have to come up with different solutions. When I say different solutions, I mean those that are based on understanding how people behave, why they behave the way they do. And I think there are 3 steps that I would mention here that can help with that. So first, I believe that we need to observe more. We rely on surveys too much in events. And it's like, we put too many surveys out there hoping that we will receive reliable answers. But the science is clear. People say one thing and they will do the other thing. So they will say, oh, this is a great event, I'm going to attend it. And then they don't show up. Right? Or they will say like, oh, this was an interesting presentation. But then if you were to observe them during that time at the session, you would see that they were on their phone. Was it interesting? I don't know. So I don't say that we don't need surveys altogether. No, we do. As well as, we should use tech that is available, thankfully, right now to collect different data. But we need to add the 3rd element, which is crucial, observation. So observe people and observe what they do and add that to your mix when you make decisions about your event design. So observe is the first step. Then I would say the second step would be explore, because too often we settle on a first answer to the question we ask ourselves, like, why do people attend events? The obvious answer is to network, to learn, right? And we are fine with that. We think that that's the real answer. But in fact, when you go deeper and if you allow yourself to think more about this question, you will probably find out some more answers that may not be so obvious, but they may be something that you need to improve your event. So, for example, I've read this article recently about how parents pile up for the conferences because they want to escape the family routine, So,
there might be a parent here guilty of such things.
Exactly, right? And I was amazed to read that, because that's exactly the example for this step, to explore. Yes, they might attend for learning. Yes, they might attend to network and find more business, but they may also have this goal. So what can you do as an event planner what can you change in your event design? What kind of format you can use or activities to add to fit that goal? Because it may not be just one person, right? Most often it's a lot of people with that particular goal that come to the event. So you need to know about those goals and about those people and provide them with a certain experiences. So
make it the mini vacation that they're hoping for as they're going to this conference.
Yeah. So go beyond the obvious reasons and explore more. And the third step is to test. That's something that is probably the main part of the answer to your question. But again, without those two previous steps, I don't think that it will matter much. So what I mean by testing is that it's of course risky, but that's the only sustainable way to innovate. Come up with some behavior-based solution and test. And that's how you know if it works for your event, for your audience. Observe, explore, and test. That's how you can do to make it feel less risky.
I love it. Now, obviously, testing requires a set of resources and even time. Do you feel like those could be challenges and reasons why a lot of people are kind of adverse to testing some of those theories during the event, right? And is there anything that could be helpful for them to take it in smaller strides?
Well, I feel like, yes, of course, there is like challenge of having less resources available for that. But again, that's why I feel like it's exactly where I step in and I can help with, because I know that event planners themselves may not have those resources like time at their disposal, right? So I feel like you need to test small things and change something in small ways just to see for yourself that it works and it brings amazing results. And when you believe in that and when you see how it works, then you can go further and test, some bigger ways. I think that's the only way. And also, ask questions and just learn more about different ways to apply event psychology.
And surround yourself with the right partners that might be able to actually support that effort. So during one of my previous conversations with Tahira and Dean, which probably you're familiar with, the author of Intentional Event Design, we talked about how important it is to design events that involve all senses. And as you said once before in a different post, as much as it seems like a no-brainer, we need to get back to basics and put some serious effort into designing with senses in mind. And I love to hear from you about the science behind designing events around all of our senses that have potential to put people in a certain state of feeling where they might be more susceptible and where the information that they are receiving, it gets retained better and also lasts longer. So in a month from now, you still remember why you went to that conference and what did you hear during that one keynote?
Senses is my favorite topic because it feels like magic, but it's not. It's how we are wired. We use our senses to intake and process information, and then those different sensory stimuli linked in our brain to create meaning and memory. And so when we use more senses and when there are more senses engaged, the stronger ties are there for an object or a memory, right? And our experience becomes more memorable. And so I feel like although we kind of pay attention to those in events when we create event experiences, but in a way we don't really take it too serious. We don't take it to the level where it's scientifically proven, or there are, some differences that would make your event stand out because you use something that is based on science and based on research. So, and there are so many studies, that sound more like magic, and they showcase amazing things about how senses work. We mainly use the sense of vision, and it is indeed our primary sense, but like I said, the more senses are involved, the more powerful the effect is, the outcomes. So a few examples that come to mind is that I recently read about research about how people prefer curvy lines over sharp lines. So the research has found that when people look at sharp objects, a region in their brain gets activated that responds to danger. And it doesn't happen when we look at the curvy lines. So what it means for the event design, it means that when you create your event space, when you design it, you need to pay attention to that. And if you use more curvy lines, in the furniture or, in the decor in your event space, that will make people feel more comfortable and relaxed. It doesn't mean that they will enter this space and they will say, oh, wow, there are so many curvy lines. I feel so comfortable. Of course not. They will not even notice it consciously, but on a subconscious level, that will make them feel much better, and that will lead to better satisfaction and to better experience for them. So those kind of things. Another example is about sounds or audio. I love that because I recently asked someone, do you have a signature tune for your event? And they said no. And I was like, you should, because it will strengthen your event branding. Probably don't feel like just one sound make a difference, but I've recently seen the results of testing for the Netflix sound, for the Netflix opening, the studum sound, yep. Right? So, and they tested, there was a neuro testing for this opening with or without a sound. And guess what? With a sound, people had the increased attention and their emotions were elevated. So that means that they immediately, when they heard the sound, they immediately were more attentive to what's coming. Just one thing, made a huge difference, right? So when you have a signature tune for your event, every time people will hear it, they will come back in time. They will remember your event.
Yeah, why? Like, for example, radio has mastered that with radio jingles. And even if you couldn't see and all you did was listen, you know what's coming next by just that one jingle sound, whatever bumper that was playing. Yeah, you're right. It's like it will bring in either memories or just some information on what is it that is about to come up.
Right. Music is powerful. There was a famous experiment. They did it in a wine shop. So when the French music was playing, the sales of French wine went up. They switched to German music. The sales of German wines went up. Can you imagine that? I mean,
interesting.
That's a controlled scientific experiment. They showed it, and it's amazing. The music has power to influence sales, influence our learning, influence our emotions. So we don't use it intentionally too much in events. That's what I'm trying to advocate for and to teach about, because we need to be more intentional about tools like we have at our disposal. Like, it's not a rocket science. It's just, music, and it's available to you, so you can use it if you know how to do it right.
Yeah.
Or, sense of touch. There was a research about direct mail. So they showed that when people received something tangible in the mail, like a letter, as opposed to an email, it produced more emotional response. And so people remembered it more and better. I mean, if you want to thank your attendees, you can send a card.
Yeah, exactly. It's like maybe registration will spike if you send them an actual, letter invite.
Yeah.
I love this topic because I was actually attending an event I was producing. I was behind the scenes, and it was a hybrid event. We had an audience in person, but also they tried to bring the virtual audience into the experience. So what they did, aside from employing, visuals and audio and stingers from a production point of view, and even like having those bumpers, audio bumpers and walk-up music, those are all tools that, are not hard to use. We just have to plan it and put it in that run of show so that it's part of the production flow. And this event, what they did to capture a bit more of the senses of the audience that was joining virtually, they actually sent essential oils, small little bottles of essential oils. And then when it was time to bring everyone in for this one application, they told that people at home, the people in the ballroom, okay, everyone unpack your essential oils, put it in your palm of your hand, make sure that you rub it really fast and then take a breath in, right? So as they were doing this was like a experience that everybody was having at the same time. So what happened next was whatever was shared was sort of linked to this one smell. And I forgot exactly what they sent. I don't know, peppermint or something, but the essential oil. But it was just like, now, next time you're going to maybe, put some essential oils in your diffuser at home. If peppermint comes up, you're going to remember what they were talking about at this one session.
Absolutely. That's a great great example. And, sense of smell is very much overlooked. And yes, there is a question also about, sensitivity to smells, for example.
Yeah.
But there are ways to go around it and still, use it because it's a very powerful sense. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, Victoria, we're going to take a short break before we move on and dive deeper into this fascinating conversation, because there's so much more to be said about how we can design experiences that really trigger people in the right way based on neuroscience. So hold on for a second. We're taking a small break to acknowledge our podcast sponsor and supporter, and we will be right back to continue this conversation. Before we move any further, I wanted to give a quick shout out to our main sponsor, Trifan Events, which is a boutique event planning and production agency that will come alongside you, offering personalized event planning and technical support, strategic event design, production and technology management, and flawless execution for live, virtual, and hybrid events. The team at Trifan Events is passionate about planning and producing event experiences that get people involved with true moments of interaction, engagement, and co-creation, while offering white glove treatment throughout the entire planning process, enabling you to reach your event goals with the use of creativity, production tools, and event technology. To find out how Trifan Events can plan and produce your event become memorable, go to trifanevents.com. Coming back to our conversation today with our featured guest, Victoria Matei, an event psychology advisor and co-founder of Matei Events, who's ready to demystify the human behavior that helps event professionals plan better events. So, Victoria, it's not major news to any event professionals that the way we plan, design, and produce events hasn't changed a whole lot, even after COVID. And especially because of COVID and the technology that we have available now, the production tools that we use to produce events have certainly changed, and yet we're still somehow planning events the same old way, as you mentioned, in so many cases. I mean, I've been part of so many in-person events in the last 6 months alone, and it's almost like we went straight back to what we were doing before. So what are some things that could be improved at events based on the recent scientific research findings?
I should say, I'm pleased to see that we are slowly but steadily moving into a direction where we apply more science-based tools, because when I think back like 5 years ago, when I started advocating those solutions like on a serious level, right, on a regular, when I started advocating those solutions 5 years ago, it was different in terms of how event professionals approached it and how they responded. And now I see more and more event professionals taking event psychology into serious consideration. But of course, it's a long way still, to go. And one of the examples that I still talk about is how we have this imbalance in the content in event programming, because we have a lot of packed agendas, sessions back to back with little to no breaks at all. And when we have those breaks, they usually are restroom breaks. I recently saw that at an event, they have 10 minutes break in a program and they call it a networking break. Like, seriously, come on. You cannot.
You can barely get a coffee in 10 minutes.
Right? So the fact that you call it networking break will not make it a networking break. So we need to think seriously about those breaks. And there are so many studies about how adding breaks increases engagement and reduces cognitive overload. And eventually it affects people's satisfaction with their learning experience. But also what it does, it helps people remember more from what they've learned. So what we need to do is make it more frequent, so add more breaks to the programming, but also to make breaks more meaningful. We need to make them experience again in itself, because it's not just, you don't have to leave those breaks to chance. You need to orchestrate and design them as well. When on a brain level, what happens, and when we have a break, our brains are still busy processing the information, and they kind of put the information from short-term to long-term memory. So when we don't have a break, then that information just disappears, because it just still, it sits in the short-term memory and then it disappears. So we need breaks for that to recharge and to for our brains to be able to process the information and store it. And breaks can be just a moment of doing nothing, or it can be a switch to a different activity. So those kind of things I haven't seen those kind of things too often in events yet. So we need to change that. Surveys, I mentioned surveys as well. It's something that I believe that we don't do right. We do surveys too long. We ask wrong questions, and we rely on surveys too much. And that should be changed. Yeah, so those kind of things as examples.
I love the idea of structuring some breaks in between sessions, especially if the content is very heavy educational or whatever, for what reason. I've seen this done really well at an event. It was a medical conference and there was like one session after another. So the opportunity to really like finish with one session, what you learned, and then prepare for what's coming next was limited. What they did well was they had the MC for that one particular ballroom that introduced the speakers throughout the day. And what they would do in between sessions is use like very easy tools to use, online quizzes, apps that it would have a gamification way of quizzing without actually needing to, pass or not the particular test. But it's just to remind you like the main takeaways of the previous session. And then you gain some points, whatever that you could turn into like get a snack or get a free coffee if you, packed up enough points. But that was very interesting because people became interested to play the game and show that they're learning and they're like receptive, and then get their free coffee or something, whatever they packed it to be. But it was very interesting because it wasn't hard. It's not a hard thing to do, yet it just takes that step of intentionality behind the design of this session. Like, how are we making sure that people are not just attending, but retaining the information that are learning?
No, repetition is a great technique that, again, is not often used. When we repeat information at regular intervals after we initially have learned something, this is something that helps retain information and helps us remember it better and longer. So, yeah.
So we both agree that in order to create excellent events that people will want to return to, one must understand how the brain works and how people decide what motivates them, what makes them a spark, how they learn, how they communicate, and why they behave the way they do. So in your opinion then, based on the research that you've studied and you've seen in action, what are some current event planning practices that go against how humans work and therefore against creating excellent events?
Well, packed agendas is, what I mentioned already. It's completely against how people work because cognitive overload is a major barrier to great experiences. Because when we are overwhelmed with information or choices, that, first of all, that makes our experience worse, but it also makes our decision-making worse. So if I want people to register for my event, I should make my registration as easy as possible, right? And so when I went to an online event, I tried to register for an online event, and they had like 20 plus questions, including like which county, not country, county I'm from. I mean, I get it. You need some information about your attendees. There are some other ways to do it right and to make it easier for people, because I ended up, just because it was free and virtual, I ended up just not going there because I didn't want to spend 15 plus minutes registering for an event. And I'm pretty sure I'm not alone in this. So making it easy at every critical point in the attendee's journey is one thing that we should really think about, and we don't do it right. And that cognitive overload, it comes not only when we ask people to register, it's about, content and how we prep speakers. That's another thing that we don't do right, I believe. Sometimes, events have seasoned or professional speakers, but in most cases, those speakers are not professional. That's why we need to really pay serious attention to how we do the preparation for them, how we help them make their content shine. Because it's a win-win for everybody, right? If the session is interesting and engaging on a brain level, that's how the speaker wins, the organizer wins, and the attendees win. And so what we usually do, or what I at least often see, is that, a list of steps to follow, like a checklist for a speaker provided, best way. But it's not the best way. It's the minimum. But I've never seen the organizer including brain-friendly tips for creating content into those checklists or into guidelines. Usually it's about check your mic and camera. There is nothing about how do I need to set my background so that people are not get too distracted or do not get fatigued when they see me presenting online. How do I use accessible fonts? How do I calm down my nerves? Again, based on some tips rooted in psychology and neuroscience. How do I make my content engaging? And how do I not overwhelm people with information? I once went to a trade show, once just of many times, when I saw an academic presentation covered, the slide was covered in text. And I was like, okay, you know what? It's a basic mistake. We talk about it, we laugh about it, but we still see it at events over and over again, right?
Or the font is so small, there's like impossible for you to read it. It's like, why is it even on the screen? I don't understand.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like that's a big chunk of, or a big aspect that we need to think thoroughly about. Networking is another example. I know it's a challenge and it's a big challenge. There is no just one universal solution to that challenge. But event psychology or social psychology, the science of how people communicate, should be brought into the mix of solutions for that challenge. So far, we have networking left to chance. We don't consider any social fatigue or, creating some meaningful conversations.
Or overwhelmed. There's,
exactly.
people like me, I get actually overwhelmed as much as I'm what I call myself an ambivert. I love people, but there's a level of interaction after which I am just done. And I need to retrieve to a space that is quiet so I can recharge, because that was way too much. And a lot of those networking events, all you see is like a lot of people, a lot of everything, music playing, everybody's talking louder and louder. The drinks are just not helping because now everybody's like a little bit tipsy, and you're like, it's too much. Like, I can't take it anymore. Like, I need to run now.
Yes. What you describe is called social fatigue. And it was especially noticeable after the pandemic, when we started meeting in mass again, and people shared how they felt this difference, how quickly they got emotionally drained. They probably had this experience before, but it wasn't so noticeable for them because it was a standard approach. But like you said, I'm with you on this. I need the time and the place to recharge after a while when I am at a big event, even at a small event. So it matters, and not only for us too, but for many, many people. So we need to, as event planners, we need to take this into account and change the event design accordingly.
Absolutely. Well, I feel like there's so much more to be said here, and time is definitely not in our favor right now. But as we're going to change tracks, because this pivot that we just talked about, the overwhelm, it actually really helps to segue into our next topic that is related to the current season's focus on mental and physical health, which basically still ties a whole lot in the well-functioning psychology of an individual. And I don't know about you, but for me, 2022 has been quite a roller coaster ride of going back to in-person events. And it's like you said, that social fatigue has played such a huge role into some of my interactions, and just trying to find moments of quietness and alone time, just so that I can recharge. And just the traveling that has happened, it's been, maddening. And I feel like there's been little to no break, just trying to figure out, okay, so just to recollect and make sure that, okay, I am not burning myself out. And 2023 hasn't been any much different, unfortunately, in the last, 2 months at the time of recording this podcast. So as we are, looking at ways, neuroscience and psychology, in which we can do a better job at taking care of ourselves, what would be some of your tips that come from that area of science that would help with this work-life balance or keeping healthy boundaries around physical, mental, and spiritual health during some of the craziest busy event seasons?
I feel, like burnout is a curse for event professionals. And I'm certainly guilty of, not following the best practices to keep myself sane at some moments in my life. So we need to work more on that, and we need to allow ourselves to be more vulnerable. Actually, the studies reveal that when you show your vulnerability, it makes people like you more. So we often are afraid to show our vulnerability, but we shouldn't. And another thing that I've recently learned about is I talked with Vanessa Bonds, who wrote a book, You Have More Influence Than You Think. And in addition to many other things, we discussed, burnout and how saying no actually can help, because partly the reasons for the burnout is that we cannot say no to a colleague, for example, and we just prefer to burn ourselves out rather than say no. Mm-hmm. And she explains in her book how we can do that and what science says about it. So it's really a fascinating thing. I do recommend to read it. I won't go into details here, but basically what works for me is reading books about what science says on this topic and immerse myself into nature, because I feel like when I'm immersed into nature, when I go for a walk, I'm recharged, and that works for me. And the third thing is to surround myself with people that bring joy.
Well, it sounds like it's the recipe for a well-rounded life that helps you stay on top of things, creative, but also be able to produce better, whatever it is, your area of expertise, because we all have different strengths. And I know for myself, aside from wanting to stay fit, wanting to look young, wanting to feel strong, is also building stamina for those super long event days that many times just run one into another. And using fitness, for example, working out, weightlifting as an outlet after a stressful event day has really been something that has helped me many times over and over again. So as we come to a close here, because this has been such a fantastic conversation, Victoria, and thank you so much for sharing of your experience and the learned wisdom and insights that you've managed to collect over the years up to this point. I would love in closing, maybe one last piece of advice to any event professional out there that is looking to transform their events using brain science insights in ways that would help them rethink event design, and maybe some tangible ways that they can start implementing right away.
Well, like I always say, if you think about it, experiences take place in people's minds first and foremost. So everybody has a brain, and if you want to reach people, if you want to convince them to take specific action, then you need to learn how brains work. And my advice would be to start small and think that you don't need to have a PhD in neuroscience to apply event psychology. You can do it right now. That's the beauty of it, because most of the solutions are simple and yet effective. So you need to read books, ask questions, ask for help, and take a course, join the like-minded people, start, with some small changes, and you will see the amazing results, I promise.
Well, you can also take the psychology course that you actually put out there. So that's going to be in the episode notes if you're interested to dive deeper into the world of neuroscience, as it can be as applicable strategic tips to your event. Thank you again, Victoria. And then for anyone that is actually curious to learn more, where they can connect with you, and where are you hanging out the most, aside from LinkedIn that we already actually put it out there?
Yeah, so LinkedIn and Twitter are my two social channels. And if you need more information, resources, and links to articles, links to my course and to the Event Psychology Club, they all are on my website. It's matey.events, matey.events, events. You can find all those links there. But there are, of course, separate links for the course, and for the club, which is eventpsychology.gumroad.com. But again, you can find it all on matey.events.
Well, thank you. Thank you, friends, for hanging all the way till the end with us. Thank you, Victoria, for joining me, for the work that you do and the inspiration that you provide for all other event professionals out there, and, the resources that you provide for them. Thank you for everyone that has tuned in, and make sure that you get subscribed to our YouTube channel, a brand new YouTube channel that houses all of our video episodes. And don't miss our next episode coming out soon. Thank you, Victoria. Have a good one.
Thank you. Have a good one too. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Events Demystified podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please take a moment to review it, rate it, and share it with other event professionals that could benefit from it. Connect with us on social at Events Demystified Podcast. We would love to hear from you and what you're up to. If you'd like to learn more about Tree Fan Event services and find out if we're a good fit in supporting your event, can we help your event be successful with a 20-minute free consultation? Link in the episode's notes. Thanks for tuning in.